make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Seven Mountain Mandate is sort of a prophetic meme, a notion that Christians are granted dominion over different aspects of life, and so you can link that. Some people link it to the Book of Revelation at the very end, and some link it to the Genesis account of giving the different parts of all the parts of the earth and all its inhabitants to humanity to have dominion over. And so 7 mountains is just a convenient way, of course, drawing on the heaven sort of 7 number to carve out those different aspects of the earth and its culture into 7. The list, put them in alphabetical order, so I wouldn't forget them. It's business, education, entertainment, family, government, media, and religion.
Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and watchers. I'm your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Burtram. How's it going?
Doing well. Thanks, Will.
Hey, and this week we have Paul Djupe. He is a political scientist at Denison University who specializes in the intersection of religion and politics. His work focuses on how religious communities provide political information and how this information influences political behavior. He's an affiliate scholar with an organization we know, love, and trust, the PRI, and is the co-editor of the Politics and Religion Journal. And we are just so thrilled to have you on the show, Paul. So, welcome to Faithful Politics.
Thanks so much. This has been something I've aspired to do. So glad to be asked.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I want to tell our audience that we were talking about this just before we hit record, that you've been on my sort of top 10 list of people I've wanted to talk to, and it's like I wouldn't call it a hit list because I don't want to be on some FBI watch list or something, but it's close. It's close to that. But anyway, I kind of gave a real sort of rough description of who you are, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get into this field of politics and religion?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in Ohio a long time. Grew up in Chicago, and went to a school that was affiliated with the Lutheran Church. Right now, so Gustavus Adolphus College was that. I've been at Denison University for 25 years now, which used to be associated with the American Baptist Church, but severed that affiliation 100 years ago. Actually, it's interesting. I was just thinking about this. I was in Florida. My uncle just died, and he was a long time. So sorry about that low note, but it was great to see family and recognize all the religious connections in my family. Lots of clergy in my family. My grandpa was a clergy person. My uncle was long time in the Evangelical Covenant Church, kind of like the Swedish Baptists. And then my parents were part of that, but the journey my parents took was really interesting. And I'll make this quick so we can move on to interesting stuff. But they actually left that denomination, which was part of the family for more than 100 years, when they got a new clergy person in their church and started doing kind of more Christian right kind of politics, and it really turned them off. And so then they went on this journey that took them to the main line and other denominations. And that was really interesting to watch. And I kind of took one more step after that, and am not religious anymore, but, it's really interesting. So when I was in college, I was really sort of wrestling with who I am and, as everybody does in college, and struck on a course about religion and politics with my favorite professor. And I thought, wow, this is fascinating. And trying to understand where my family had come from and where they are and where I was. And it just kind of stuck from that point on. And then, of course, following what's happened in the United States since the early 1990s when I was in college, a million years ago, has been absolutely fascinating. So this has been a really rewarding career for me.
That's pretty awesome. I love that trajectory. And I just love hearing like how people got to where they are, because I mean, I don't have nearly the academic, bona fides that you do, but from a faith perspective, I grew up, primarily like atheist. dabbled in Wiccan, and then I came to the faith in 2008, much later in life. And so like my perception of how faith is being leveraged to achieve political ends is really like, it's disconcerting, because I feel like faith has actually saved my life in a lot of different ways that we don't have to get into now. But it's like, this would be a bad time for a church to think about growing because like the folks that are kind of advertising Christianity, are really, really poor vessels to carry that message. So, one
of the things I sort of take from my background is never make big assumptions about American religion. There's so much variety out there, and so many different ways of approaching it, and these stories, like my family, where you'd think they would stick one way. You can't bank on that. So I think that's really helped me in the kinds of things that I've studied over time. So I like that approach.
Well, so you wrote an article recently called "Belief in the Seven Mountain Mandate Appears to Be Growing in the Last Year," and the Seven Mountain Mandate is something that we have covered quite a bit on this show, but I'd love maybe for the audience that might be coming to us for the first time, can you explain what the Seven Mountain Mandate is?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Seven Mountain Mandate is sort of a prophetic meme, a notion that Christians are granted dominion over different aspects of life, and so you can link that. Some people link it to the Book of Revelation at the very end, and some link it to the Genesis account of giving the different parts of all the parts of the earth and all its inhabitants to humanity to have dominion over. And so 7 mountains is just a convenient way, of course, drawing on the heavenly sort of 7 number to carve out those different aspects of the earth and its culture into 7. The list, I put them in alphabetical order so I wouldn't forget them. It's business, education, entertainment, family, government, media, and religion. The notions, the history of the idea of this sort of prophetic meme can go back to the 1970s, where there was a meeting of prominent evangelicals. But I think the most common one these days in the progenitor, kind of in the modern era, is Lance Wallnau, a New Apostolic Reformation apostle. And Bill Johnson in 2013 wrote a book called Invading Babylon, the Seven Mountain Mandate. And that's kind of the reason we know most about the Seven Mountain Mandate at this point.
Wait, just to stop you there for a second. So Bill Johnson, is that the Bethel Bill Johnson?
It's the Bethel Bill Johnson.
Yeah, all the Bethel music that everyone loves, and we sing in all the churches.
Wait, so now I can listen to Bethel or Hillsong?
Nope, you got no choices. All your worship music's gone. All you got is Elevation, and then some other people that no one really likes. That's all you got. No, I'm just kidding, dude. So, I mean, it is funny. I remember hearing about Bill Johnson and his kind of association with the Seven Mountain Mandates when we had it really struck me when we had on our show Andre Gagné, who is a professor, right? I think in Montreal. And he was fascinating. And I'm like, oh my gosh, man, this is wild how much it has gone into so much of what is now mainstream in terms of the evangelical church and substrate of Christianity in America. And I know it's beyond America. It's not just America, but my experience is just primarily almost completely in America. And so, but obviously I think that I think that a mistake that a lot of people make is because we love to categorize so much, we create these monolithic ideas in our minds of everyone who belongs and believes in this certain category, and this is how they act. And of course, there are trends, and of course, there's things that sociologists can understand, and that's all part of it. But I would love to hear how the Seven Mountain Mandates has kind of transformed, even like particularly in the last, 4 years, maybe 8 years since since Trump took office, and then the 2020 election. Now we're coming up to 2024. How it's transformed, how it's accelerated, and then, but even help us get some context of, is it the same Seven Mountain Mandates that in the potentially apocryphal lore, guys like Bill Bright, and then I think Lindsay, I forgot the last name, but they kind of came up with and had a separate vision. Is it the same thing, or has it taken on a life of its own that's now become maybe similarity, maybe it rhymes, but it's distinct?
Right. So that older notion, Lauren Cunningham, I think one of them, and
Lauren. I knew it was like a kind of a guy's that was kind of a girl's name, but anyway. Don't want to get myself in trouble on that one.
Good idea. Their notion was 7 spheres. And then I think there was a meeting that Lance Wallnau had with Lauren Cunningham somewhere around 2000 or something, and that kind of planted a seed. And then I think it really crystallized when Lance wrote the book with Bill Johnson in 2013. And I'd leave it to the humanists probably to detail this history better than I can. My best guess is that since Lance Wallnau is a marketing expert, right? He thought spheres isn't as exciting a notion as mountains. And you want to give people this sense of challenge, right? And I think actually the way I was thinking about it today, I was writing up some notes about this, is really, we're playing a game of King of the Mountain, like on the kids' playground, right? And there was a pretty critical shift, kind of right after they wrote this book in 2015, when evangelicals kind of broadly felt like they got pushed off of the King of the Mountain. Like they went from this is in June. This was the end of June. This was the decision Obergefell that legalized same-sex marriage. Evangelicals went from the majority to the minority with the announcement of that decision, pushed off the King of the Mountain, right? And so this notion of like having to climb this, of having to get back on top, is really appealing. Because like lots of language at that time was signaling that they were kind of the minority and oppressed and, not on top anymore and needed to get back there. So I think it was just kind of the right time, the right notion, the right prophetic meme at the right time for lots of people, right? And then, it takes time for it to spread around and get out there. So, at this point, it's pretty clear that this has gotten around. Lots of people have heard of it. And lots of people are willing to adopt it, not just charismatics. And maybe you want to get into a couple of statistics.
Yeah, I remember when we were talking to Matt Taylor, aka Seth Rogen lookalike.
He's basically his doppelganger, and he even sounds like him too. It's not funny. Even just looking; he sounds like him too.
So when we were talking to him about the 7 mountains, I think he made a comment about sort of the spheres and mountains that like you can't climb to the top of a sphere. You'd slide. There's really
not easily.
Yeah, not easily.
You need a ladder.
But I want to talk to you a little bit about how 7 Mountain Mandate got into, I don't know, the public discourse, if you will. You wrote in your article. Government may be the linchpin, or at least is the most pressing mountain to dominate, because as Apostle Mario Bramnik suggested, we're in the greatest battle for the soul of our nation. Our battle is not between left or right; it's a spiritual war between light and darkness, and ultimately, who is God of the U.S. And I want to have you maybe talk a little bit about that and how it's connected to sort of the Alabama ruling about the frozen embryos, but I want to give a quick disclaimer to people listening or watching, because like we use a tagline for our show, not right, not left, but up. And in this like quote I just read, he says our battle is not between left or right; it's a spiritual war. So I just want our audience to know that tagline is not connected to the seven mountains in any form
in any way
or capacity. So. So can you talk a little bit about the Alabama ruling and how that kind of plays into, raising awareness about the seven mountains?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, Josh Burtram here, faithful host of the Faithful Politics Podcast. I want to let you know about a compelling new spinoff, the Faith Roundtable, where I'll be interviewing top faith leaders, theologians, and scholars to unpack the pressing issues that are shaping the church in America today. We'll dive into topics like faith in public life, social justice, and how we can engage our communities more effectively. Make sure you don't miss any of our enlightening conversations by subscribing to it on our YouTube channel. Join me at the Faith Roundtable, where deep discussion meets thoughtful insight.
Yeah, so the decision in Alabama was to grant some limited rights to frozen embryos, as if the destruction of those embryos would be the equivalent of killing a person, and so created penalties obviously for destruction of those embryos. One of the justices that signed on had also given an interview, and he'd used some of this kind of language, not explicitly Seven Mountain in the decision, but justified at least his decision in sort of a right to life kind of context and a very explicitly religious kind of context. But then in the interview that he gave, I think it was the day of or after, anyway, he gave an interview about the same time where he used the Seven Mountain and said that he was a believer in the Seven Mountain Mandate. And this gave this sense of, here's someone who's clearly on top, right? I mean, they're on the Supreme Court of Alabama, making decisions that were explicitly justified with religious language, and then saying that he's a Seven Mountain guy. Really sort of reaffirmed what most people's notion of the Seven Mountain Mandate is actually about, which is about dominion, which is about conquest, about control and power, right? It's not just about achievement; it's about power and dominion. So that was the kind of troubling notion about that. I mean, otherwise, encouraging people to go climb a mountain and go achieve and be great at what you do. I mean, there's nothing controversial about that. I think it only becomes controversial when it's really about power and subjecting people to particular worldviews. So that was a pretty dramatic kind of confirmation of what many people's ideas of the Seven Mountain Mandate.
I was going to say, if it was a relatively benign gesture to climb a mountain, it's like you can get the Seven Mountain Mandate like endorsed by REI, or Patagonia,
Absolutely.
Absolutely, dude. Well, there's another one that I'm forgetting now that it's my Jack. What's the other popular one? Anyway, we don't have to get sidetracked on that. It's not Everclear. That's a kind of drink that you're supposed to avoid, or a band in college. I'll think of it right while I'm speaking. So I feel like I say obviously, but there are certain demographics, groups, religious denominations where this has taken hold and kind of spread more and been whether they're fertile ground for it, whatever it was, these ideas have taken hold and now grown. And you had mentioned, which was intriguing, that it isn't just in these kind of charismatic circles, but there's a lot of places where a lot of different denominational ideologies and people with different views on Scripture actually are grabbing hold of some of this, like it's a unifying force in some way. Talk to us a little bit more about that. Like, what are the specific demographic groups, religious denominations, where this belief has become more prevalent? Is it growing? And then, I think your point was that it is, but how is it growing? And if you feel like you can, kind of throw out maybe a why do you think, what is it about this that's making it so that people are grabbing onto it?
Yeah, well, the thing I think I dodged in the last question was actually answering whether it had grown or not. And so, we really haven't polled on this question until I decided to ask it in March of 2023. And then I did a survey again in January 2024, and I actually worked with Matt, aka Seth Rogen, we had an expanded kind of battery of new apostolic Reformation memes. We really wanted to get a sense of how big are the potential affiliates of the NAR out there. So Seven Mountains was one of them, and that's a really convenient way to talk about this stuff. Anyway, and then I kind of hid it from them that there was this change over time, because I wanted one other piece than the one that we wrote about the extent of the NAR. So anyway, in March of 2023, about 20% of the American population and then 30% of Christians said that they agreed with Seven Mountain Mandate. And it's roughly, do you believe that God has called you to the Seven Mountain Mandate, which includes education, business, and family, that kind of stuff. So just 9 months later, so January 2024, that was up to 40 or 41% of Christians. That poll was only of Christians. So again, we have to make some assumptions. I mean, what if the sample is a little weird in either one of those times, right? It could be more stable, or it could be different. Could be a little different if we got another survey. But roughly 10% growth. It looks like it's spreading, and really fast. In some ways, that's not surprising, given how much media exposure I think that folks like Lance Wallnau is getting, and of course, he's been supercharged in his Courage tour by support from TPUSA and Charlie Kirk. So that, I think, is really helping to amplify the message. And Charlie Kirk is using the Seven Mountain Mandate kind of language as well, explicitly. So that really helps to spread some of these notions out there. All right, so we had roughly 40% of Christians, and then it's different depending on lots of things. There's lots of diversity among Christians, right? And so among charismatics, it's higher, and I'll give you some actual statistics here in a second. But one really interesting thing before I get into that is, if we just characterize people based on the denominations or religious families that they're involved in, there really isn't much variation. So it's 37% of mainline Protestants. It's like 43% of those we can identify as denominational evangelicals. It's a little bit higher among Black Protestants, which isn't too surprising because there's a lot of charismatics there. But just based on the denomination they're involved in, there's just not a lot of variation. They're all about the same. So the difference is how they identify. And how they identify changes things potentially a lot. And so let me go to my, I have a list, because I thought that would be more useful, and I didn't want to misrepresent the
perfect
data. So it's about the same for non-evangelical charismatics. But once we jump to an identification like to fundamentalists, then we get to 61% say that they support Seven Mountain Mandate. It's 64% of evangelical charismatic. So they have both the self-identified evangelical and charismatic. And then the highest I could find was those who identify as charismatic and fundamentalist. And they were 72% supporting the Seven Mountain Mandate. When I looked at, I looked at race to see if that would change things a little bit. And it was interesting that whites and Blacks were in each of these categories. So no matter what the identification was, both whites and Blacks were higher than Latinos and Asians. So yeah, I mean, the baseline is about 41% of Christians, and then we can find some of the subgroups: fundamentalists, charismatic, and then once you start putting them together, then you get quite a bit higher concentrations, and most of those are whites and Blacks, fewer among Latinos and Asians. And hey, if you go to some of these events, I went to a Flashpoint Live event that was in Ohio, and it's incredible how much racial diversity there was. I mean, it wasn't just white people, and this was in a really white suburb of Columbus. But it's impressive how different people that this is reaching. And frankly, I think that's one of the reasons that Charlie Kirk might have reached out to work with Lance Wallnau in the Courage tours. Is he can reach a much broader audience than if it's just like a white guy talking about libertarian sorts of things.
It's so funny. Is that near your neck of the woods, Josh? Because Josh is from Ohio, too.
Well, I am from Northern Virginia originally. I was in Ohio, right, for a while. Yeah, I mean, I lived in Columbus, so in Canal Winchester.
Right on.
And then I was in Dayton, Ohio, for a while. Beaver Creek, essentially around there. So yeah, I mean, it's like an hour away from there.
So JD Vance referred to Dayton in that area as Appalachia, which, if you're from there,
what?
That's not it.
It's so funny.
This particular event was at a kind of charismatic prosperity gospel church in New Albany. So really wealthy. I know
exactly where New Albany is.
Yep.
So I don't know if you did you happen to look at the survey that Pew did recently about religion, politics? They were asking questions about like who people think is more religious, Trump or Biden, or just a bunch of random questions. So like I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, but
saw some.
Yeah, Gregory Smith, who led that research, we had him on a couple of weeks ago, and we just stuck to the numbers. So he was very, very disciplined. Didn't get into the what does it all mean. so I'm curious of what you saw. Like, do the survey results kind of comport with what you've been seeing in sort of other surveys you've either done yourself or have read elsewhere?
Yeah, well, the trick about some of these questions is that they're so different. There's almost nothing to compare it to. But one of the things that I think I'm finding, this in some ways this is an old saw for me, is thinking about religion from a denominational perspective is starting to lose its currency. There's so many different ways for prophetic memes or information or just kind of thoughts that might bear on religion to reach people from different sources. So it's akin to what we saw during the pandemic when especially evangelical, but not just evangelical churches were flooded with QAnon information and belief. And you just can't, I mean, people just aren't confined. They're not in boxes. They're not in channels that are defined by denominations and religious families. And so the spread, I like the Marvel cup. Nice. There's so many ways for them to get reached by folks like Lance Wallnau, right? And so he doesn't even have so what's a religious leader these days, right? Like, Lance Wallnau is a religious leader. He doesn't have a congregation. He has a show, and he goes and does these road tours. Yes. And so there's, what does it all mean? Well, religion's changing quite a lot, and it's changing quite rapidly, and in ways that our kind of old measurement schemes really can't keep up, right? I mean, and the ways that we understood, religion as we were growing up, I think are changing quite dramatically. So there's lots of hybrids. Religion is becoming much more non-denominational. There's an incredible amount of flexibility across, they're watching others, right? And figuring out how to do church in a way that reaches more people. And so, I mean, the amount of change here is just incredible to watch. So that's a lot of kind of inference about what's going on. But I think that's one of the big takeaways of some of the things we're seeing now.
Yeah. So most importantly, it's the North Face. That's the company I was thinking about. Nothing to do with Everclear. I don't even know where that came from.
Way to come back.
There you go. Yes, the North Face. Come on, somebody. So I have like a question here. Let me just kind of get it out, if that makes sense. Let me kind of talk a little bit. I'll try not to take too long, but I just want to kind of riff on this just a little bit. So I'm thinking about like all the different people that 70% represents, of, people who are evangelical. What did you say there? Charismatic and fundamentalist. They identified as both those things. And so that kicks it up into the 70s, which is a huge majority of people, like when you're thinking about that believe in the 7 Mountain Mandates. And my immediate question is, well, what do they believe about the 7 Mountain Mandates? Is it the same thing as Lance Wallnau is saying? Is it the thing that Andre Gagnier came on to our program and was so vehemently against because of its implications of what they were saying and the potential for even, coercive force, things like that being used, and the kind of concern that it should cause? Are people at that level, or do they just think, yeah, I mean, sure, I would love it for Christians to be in places of influence in government, be in places of influence in, Hollywood, be in places of influence in sports and in the academia and all that. Is there any way to gauge that, or are we kind of left based on like, how do we understand that kind, like what their actual content of your belief? And I'm sure that's notoriously difficult to do. With
I think it's actually that hard.
Okay, well, great.
I mean, so it's hard just reading it itself and then trying to make inferences based on what you think the question means. So that's hard, right? And we'll disagree about it till the end of time. This is actually the problem of talking about Christian nationalism. And if you just look at, say, the survey questions that have been used by Whitehead and Perry, I mean, they're super vague, right? They seem like they could be super vague, lots of possible interpretations, that sort of thing. And so it just takes some other questions to figure out, and we can, correlate those. Like if you believe the 7 Mountain Mandate, do you also believe this? And that can help us kind of sort things out. Before I forget, I don't want to give the impression that like those combinations of identities were sort of additive. So, charismatics and fundamentalists is not like adding these distinct groups. These are like the subgroup of charismatics who also identify as fundamentalists. So there's about, at least in this recent survey, about 38% of Christians said that they identified as charismatic, Pentecostal, or spirit-filled. So that gives you a sense. And there's other ways of measuring that based on the denomination or
so that's like 73% of 30%. Is that kind of what we should see that?
Exactly.
Okay.
The 72% believe in the 7 Mountain Mandate of those who identify as charismatic and fundamentalist. So it's a much smaller group. Anyway, so how do we find out, sort of what Christian nationalism means or what the 7 Mountain Mandate means? If it's just like you should excel and, just do your thing, or if you should go out and try to oppress people. And the way to find out is to ask them, hey, do you want theonomy? Like, do you want the rule by religious law? And when you ask that, and I asked a whole bunch of questions that are like that, like, do you want the church to have a veto over legislation? Do you think that Christians should be the only ones granted full citizenship? I mean, like pretty strident kinds of, there isn't much, I don't think there's much uncertainty over what the intent is when, you say you want the church to have a veto over public policy, right? And so I can't remember exactly what the correlation coefficient is between belief in the 7 Mountain and theonomy, but it's real high. So there are some people that are going to believe 7 Mountain and reject theonomy, but most of the 7 Mountain believers are like, yes, I am, in for some degree of theonomy in the United States.
And theonomy being...
So theocracy is a rule by religious leader, and theonomy would be rule by religious law.
Law, gotcha. Wow.
So, they want to criminalize things that are like courts should enforce the things that are illegal in the Bible, should enforce kind of biblical penalties, like this sort of thing.
Really? Like stoning and stuff like that?
Yeah, I don't think I asked about stoning. Probably should have asked about stoning, but...
Or getting stoned, one of the two?
Well, probably that too. I don't think that's in the Bible. But right, so there was a big, long list of... There's actually a blog post about it. Maybe we can link it so people can check that out.
Absolutely.
Later. That'd be neat. But yeah, no, so the relationship there is pretty strong. And you can get... there's lots of other context clues too, like... Lance Wallnau, when he wrote his book, is titled "Invading Babylon," right? That's about conquest,
right,
obviously.
Yes.
And then, another way of thinking about it is the believers in the Seven Mountain Mandate are much more likely to believe in an active demonic presence in the United States, that good and evil are fighting a battle. And so, of course, if you're fighting a battle, right, that plays into the invading Babylon kind of notion, that there's a hot war between the two sides.
Oh, in your article, you mentioned Project 19. Can you explain what Project 19 is?
Yeah, Project 19 is a collaboration of Lance Wallnau and others. And of course, I forgot exactly who the others are. But they're targeting 19 counties in swing states that they believe will be pivotal in the 2024 election. So they want to organize, they want to visit those places, take the roadshow there, organize affiliated churches, and then get out the vote so they can try to turn the election.
So would this be like similar to like the Reawaken tour, but just with a Seven Mountain spin or something on it?
Yeah. Well, all of them want to win something, conquest of something, and this is specifically targeted to the 24 election, and then in a kind of more sophisticated notion of not just going to all the state houses because that would be fun, but going, to specific battleground states where it's going to be tight. And so obviously Pennsylvania's on that list. They actually had Cleveland, Ohio, which I thought was a little bit strange. I don't think Ohio was going to be in play, but whatever. I think North Carolina was on the list. I'm sure, Arizona's on the list. That sort of thing.
Wow. So with everything you've said, and with all the, attention on Seven Mountains, I guess, as if there's an outside observer, listening or watching this for the first time, they're just I haven't been convinced yet of why the Seven Mountains is necessarily bad for America. So I'd love for you to maybe, I don't know, speak to that person that's like, you guys been going on about the Seven Mountains, about Lance Wallnau, so what? I'm a Christian. I don't see anything wrong with spreading the gospel to all these different areas. So could you make an argument to respond to this imaginary person that might be listening or watching?
Yeah, sure. The approach that I take is to value democracy. So, of course, in a free democracy, there's nothing wrong with spreading the gospel. And obviously, there's nothing wrong with being a Christian in the United States. There are some areas where Christians are not the majority. And I think what we hope for in the United States and in any democracy is a sense of reciprocity, that there's going to be a rotation of people in power. And when they get in power, they're not going to strip the rights and liberties of the group that's out of power. And that's the only way that you maintain stability, functional country going forward. Otherwise, every election is essentially a war, a battle. And then if you lose everything. You lose your rights, you lose your ability to earn a living and that sort of thing. And the language, the intent of the Seven Mountain Mandate kind of folks is they want to get in power and then stay in power by, it seems like, any means necessary. So the intent, the attitudes that go along with the Seven Mountain Mandate, it's not just the ascent, it's what you do once you've climbed and reached the top, and that is prevent anybody else from getting to the top of that mountain. So the analogy is like the election. They want to prevent people from any other group from winning elections going forward. You can see that, in some of what the Republican Party has been doing in terms of voting rights and gerrymandering and some other things. Not that Democrats don't gerrymander too; they do, and I'm opposed to that as well. But go back to the basic notion here is that we live in a pluralistic society. The only way to have a pluralistic society is to respect the rights and liberties of those in society. Seven Mountain Mandate appears to be opposed to that notion.
So that's another one of the things where I'm going to get to this question. I promise you, and I'm going to go quick. But I remember being on a Zoom call with it's a couple hundred people, and we're talking to some representatives in our local city, Richmond. And they said beforehand, hey, if they say no, that they're not willing to make this particular, legislation, we want everyone to shake your head, look real angry at them, and frown. They were instructing us, right, on what to do. Basically telling us how to respond to whatever they said, which again, I'm not saying that is, that's just what it is. I get that. You want to make sure you have a unified response. When I'm thinking about this, right, they're a group of people that are trying to, and I'm not a fan of the Seven Mountain Mandates. What I know, the more I know about it, the more I don't like it. So I just want to put that out there. I'm not a dominionist. I don't believe that. I don't think we can do that. And that's not my eschatology as a pastor, theologian, Christian, all that. But I do wonder, what's the difference between, say, the Seven Mountain Mandates and what they're trying to do, targeting, Project 19. We're saying it, almost singing the assumption as if it's a negative, bad thing. But is that different than, say, any other political action kind of, group would do? They would look for the most strategic counties to spend the most money to do the most things that they can do. Is it the Seven Mountain? And I get that this particular content of this is difficult, and it's hard for Christians, especially if we're thinking about that. We need to think about this critically and what's really going on here. But I'm trying to take a step back. And again, it's to what Will was saying, to someone who's why wouldn't they, find these 19 different areas and try to target that and make that, spend a lot of money and raise a lot of money and, do whatever it is that we need to do to get the votes in? What makes them different from anyone else? And maybe we need to argue they should be different because they represent Jesus or they represent a different idea, whatever it is. And I get that, but yeah, go ahead. You can respond to that. Yeah. I can see that. You go ahead.
I got
please.
Lots of head movements. So,
please.
No, I'm really glad that you raised this question, because my stance on this is that to an extent they're not different. They're like any other interest group, grouping in society. They should organize. They shouldn't get involved in politics. They should try to, put their views out in public for people to digest. And if they support that, great. And if they don't, fine. And they should try to, mobilize their supporters, and getting more people involved in democracy is a good thing. And so, up until that point, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with what they're doing. And in fact, much of it is very good. The only part that gives me pause is where it sort of crosses the line to say, we're not going to accept the election results. We need to prepare for war. If this doesn't go our way,
that's problematic.
Yeah, I think so. Right. And so any group that says that, we need to prepare because, if the other side wins, they're going to persecute us and all the rest of it. And, we may need to prepare for war. Or I just heard in a Portland church, if we die, we die, advocating for our beliefs. I mean, we shouldn't be approaching the democratic process as a life or death kind of decision, because for the most part, I don't really think that it is. And giving that people the impression, changes the stakes of what happens to election. We got January 6th out of this, and all the rest. So everything about Project 19, totally fine. I think it's great. It's a smart play, right? You should concentrate your efforts in battleground states, given the way the United States is set up. When you cross over to say that there's going to be violence, that's the problem.
Yeah, that's a major problem. You're fine. That's a major problem. And what you're saying is that they're saying that, or like their language is implying that. Like, is that kind of what's going on? I mean, I haven't been following.
Oh, I think you can find instances where it crosses the line to say there's going to be a body count, that we need to prepare for war. And some of it's, kind of the more metaphorical language of, put on the full armor of God. And then sometimes it takes the next step of, not just sort of put your spiritual armor on, but get the actual armor. There was, in that same Portland church, this is, part of the Her Voice movement. Don't know if you've heard of that. She's also working with, Jenny Donnelly is her name, working with Lance Wallnow on some things. She put out an image of a mother, carrying her child to go vote. And it was from Israel. And she also had this big, scary gun and said, this is what our elections are going to be about. And you need to prepare for this.
Wow.
Don't think that that's the case, right? We're not there yet. And in some ways, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy to start putting those images out there. That's where it's fine. That's the dangerous stuff. That's where, it's clearly anti-democratic kind of behavior.
Get your spiritual AR-15 ready, huh? Put on the armor of God.
Yeah.
If Jesus had an AR-15, he probably wouldn't have been crucified.
Exactly.
Which is a famous quote by our favorite Beetlejuice attendant, Congress member. Anyways, I almost want to start a company that makes body armor and then call the company God, because I feel like I could make a killing.
But it's got to be GOD, like something like an acronym.
Yeah.
But yes, no, that's good.
I mean, I'm a veteran. I could sell the whole support your veteran-owned business. I mean, anyways, we may be onto something here. So, if there's anybody out there listening that wants to help, fund this idea, just let me know. So Paul, as someone that sort of looked at this space between politics and religion, I'm curious, are we living in an unprecedented time where the intermingling of politics and religion is such that it's sort of shaping, the American, legal system, whatever, just shaping our culture? Or is this just sort of one data point amongst, thousands over the history of our country?
Yeah. There are certainly times where religious tensions and the tensions and the kind of cleavages really are different across time, but you can absolutely find instances where, those tensions have really gotten to fever pitch. And so, you can see it obviously over civil rights. And this is obviously among believers, right? You can see it, if we go way back, like the Jeffersonians opposed to the non-Jeffersonians. And I don't know, so there's lots of possibilities. There was, my uncle was just telling me, about a really interesting time, about going into World War II, where the isolationists were talking against the interventionists. And they were using this kind of very apocalyptic, that other side is evil, and so there was religious overlap with that as well as kind of how they were talking about each other. I still think this is different. I mean, maybe escalating to kind of Civil War time, because the language is so fever pitched. I mean, it really seems like one side believes the other is completely demonic, evil, and unredeemable. Can't talk to them. Can't work with them on anything. Opposed to the other side, And it overlaps with so many things. Like there's cultural overlaps, and to some extent there's racial overlaps, and there's political party overlaps, that all these things are reinforcing that kind of language, and it's difficult to break through. So yeah, I think this is maybe not completely unprecedented, but certainly such dangerous times, given the degree of overlap and insulation and feeding by the media, by certain medias, that makes it really dangerous for us about how we go forward.
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand that, and it does feel a little bit like we're in unprecedented times. Not, I think that there are the similar kinds of things that happen, themes, right, throughout history. Obviously, religion and politics being combined is as old as there is religion and politics, right? So those things that's not in any way new. But I think the newness of our technology personally has made it so that these ideas, like something like the 7 Mountain Mandate, can spread even like with a kind of speed that's unprecedented, that we are trying to figure out how to catch up with. And how do you feel like in our country, kind of, and you can even take a step back in general, like our religious convictions of the people of this country, how is it shaping views on immigration, healthcare, climate change? Like, do you see like conflict in the air in those things? Or is there ways to align and us to live together more peacefully? Like what is your sense? I mean, I know none of us have the crystal ball, but what's your sense?
Well, let me go grab it. It's over here.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's a really difficult question, and something that would be, kind of more suitable to a book treatment. But if, you look across those things, there's actually a lot of support out in the populace for like expanded healthcare, for instance. There's actually a lot of support for, environmental protection, even doing something to combat climate change. I mean, that's been, so politicized over time. So a lot of the things you listed, there's actually a lot of support in the population. Even immigration, evangelicals lag behind others in their support kind of for more generous immigration and treatment of immigrants. I think it's still like a majority support for more generous immigration. So it's lower than other groups, but still it's not, not completely opposed. We're not talking about 0-100. I mean, so one of the funny things about kind of this question is that public policy is actually somewhat divorced from sort of the politics about thinking about the groups. So the substance of what we care about, there's actually a little bit more agreement than you would expect, given the vitriol about how we talk about groups. And so that tells me it's really more about power, right, than it is about the substance of of kind of how we want to live our lives. So from that perspective, and this is something I thought for a while, is, one of the ways that we get around this is actually just to pursue the policies that people say they want. And if we have like a generous economy, if we have healthcare that's expanding and covering people and fewer people are sick, and, the environment gets cleaner, I mean, that's what people say they want, right? Then maybe that's a way to bridge some of these divides. And so I don't want to get bogged down in like what's happened during the Biden administration, because it's just not going to be, all that helpful. But you can see like people still like just hate Joe Biden and have these kind of weird perceptions, I think, of what the state of the economy is or the state of inflation or whatever. And so they're more willing to say, like, my state is doing great, but the nation's doing terrible, even though they're like really in sync with each other. And so that problem of groupthink, of group identity, driving their perception of the world is still really problematic. The facts aren't quite mattering the way that we would hope that they would matter. So, there's got to be something that like cuts through some of those barriers, right? That bridges group identity. Exactly what that is, I don't really know, and I really wish there was. Like I was talking to a group the other day, and one of the solutions that always works is getting people involved in community problems where they can work across lines of difference and just pursue things pragmatically. And people say they really like that and they want to do more of that, even though they would otherwise disagree with those folks. So how do we suddenly supercharge our local communities to pursue those kind of projects? I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily a scalable solution, but it's certainly one that works.
Yeah. Well, this has been pretty amazing, Paul, and I could probably talk to you for another hour and just pick your brain about stuff. But we all have lives and families to return to. But how can people follow your work, and what are you working on?
Yeah, working on lots of things. So one of the ways is the religioninpublic.blog, where some of these things are published. I'm on Twitter, just my name, Paul Djupe. That's our X or whatever it's called these days. I have a website that's also pauldjupe.com. That's a place to check my work. Yeah, and what am I working on? I'm working on a lot of things, but the one that's most exciting to me is a book about apocalypticism. And so this is the worldview that combines some of the things that we've been talking about and its effects on politics. Really excited about that. That should probably be out in another year and a half or so, but that's one of the most exciting things. And then, continuing this work with like Matt Taylor and stuff about charismatics and their beliefs in the NAR. That's really fun too. So thanks a ton for having me on. This was a really fun conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. We would love to have you back sometime, as you finish your book, and we can talk about, I would love to actually have a book or something about like politics, religion, and the Marvel universe. Because like the Marvel universe, I mean, like if you want to talk about apocalyptic sort of like mentality, that's like right. It's omnipresent. It's ubiquitous everywhere and every single, like I read the comics too. So like it's everywhere, every day it's like world's going to end, like Magneto's going to wipe us out or whatever. But
I'm going to work a mention in there just so it attracts your attention.
Yes, please do. Please do.
Yes.
Well, thanks again, Paul. This is Paul Djupe, political science at political scientist at Denison University. And we'll make sure that we put links of all the stuff you mentioned in the show notes and to our audience. Thanks for joining us. And remember, keep your conversations not left, not right, but up. And that is not a Seven Mountain Mandate reference. Have a good week.
Indeed.